Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on Lakers.com and Lakers Digital. My name is Mike Trudell, and if you look around your little quadrants, we have Pete Zayas joining us for the first time in this context, which we're very excited about. We have Aaron Larsuel, you know Aaron, the homie. And there's Joey Ramirez, beard continuing to grow in piece by piece. Next to Aaron, of course, Aaron, it's not that prominent, Joey, but it is great to see all you guys. How you doing this morning?
That was so much shade, Mike. I don't know what you expected from me coming in with like a James Harden beard after 2 days since I last saw you, but man, you
Well,
really sent
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned James Harden. We're about to be seeing a lot of him, and you guys, we've been wanting to know, right? All Laker people, Laker fans, people that follow the NBA have been wanting to know against whom the Lakers will be playing, and it took a long time, not only in the series but in the game. We did not know literally until the final seconds when Harden blocked Lou Dort, and then they did the 16 different video reviews. So let me just keep it generic to start. First impressions of this Lakers Rockets series, and let me start down in the corner with Aaron. What's top of mind for you, buddy?
Top of mind for me is what is this going to look like in terms of, I think the only game that we can take anything from is the first game after the trade deadline for the Rockets, when the Rockets decided to go super small. All that stuff earlier in the year with Capella, I don't think has much relevance now. So what kind of matchups are we going to see? How much can Dwight and JaVale impact this? But I think it's a series that revolves around offensive rebounding for the Lakers and turnovers for the Lakers and for the Rockets. How many field goal attempts are the Rockets going to get? Are they going to be able to, because they're going to shoot a million threes, are they going to be able to keep up with the Lakers as far as field goal attempts? Because the Lakers are going to be on the offensive glass. And so if the Lakers can keep the turnovers down, I think that's probably the key to the series.
You know, it was telling to me that this went 7 games. Before it started, there was all the uncertainty about Russell Westbrook. So I actually picked OKC to win in 7. Westbrook came back later in the series, and actually I thought that led to Houston struggling a little bit to try to figure out how to re-identify themselves and how they were going to play. And they weren't able to play that system where it was Harden and 4 shooters, right? Because Westbrook at this point is not going to hit jump shots. That made things a little bit more clogged up. But it also, and Pete, let me turn to you here, it also got Russell Westbrook, I thought, in a better rhythm, the fact that it got to game 7. Because he did not look like himself in games 5 and 6. And from a Lakers perspective, that's the one thing where you think, okay, well, now Russ is starting to get his legs under him, and maybe that will impact things a little bit differently. But before I get to some more specifics, Pete, let me come to you, too, about the first thing that comes top of mind as you think about this Lakers team playing this version of the Houston Rockets.
We're bigger, faster, and stronger, and we really need to emphasize this situations where we're able to take advantage of that. So that's transition, it's offensive rebounding, and it's Houston's defense is built to keep you on the perimeter. The more you're swinging the ball behind the three-point line and moving side to side, the better it is for them. It's also a very different series for Anthony Davis. The nature of the defenders that he's going to be facing in the first round, Hassan Whiteside, Yusuf Nurkic, they had to play a couple feet off of him or else he was going to blow by him and get to the rim. He's going to have guys pressing up on him. So the ways in which he gets to the basket and the ways in which our superstars do that, it's just going to be different than it was in that first series. So it's how well are we able to leverage our athletic advantages and get the ball in our hands 3-4 feet from the basket. If we do that, we're in great shape, but Houston's defense is built to keep you from doing that in the first place.
All right, Joey Ramirez, one of the common themes when you and I are texting about basketball and watching basketball, the words lineup data seem to come in a lot. And so I asked you last night to take a specific look at this because you have this unique Houston team. Nobody's really ever played like that without even bothering to play a true center at all, ever, which they don't, of course, right? They start P.J. Tucker at the 5, Covington at the 4, and Covington was great in Game 7, by the way. So you've studied what the Lakers have done, how they looked with their big groups, whether it was JaVale or Dwight Howard playing with the rest of the starters, in addition to how they look when AD is at the 5, and you fill that out with mostly starter guys as well. Often they're finishing lineup, right? And sometimes it's Kyle Kuzma, sometimes it's KCP and Danny Green, sometimes it's AC Fresh. What have you seen when you broke that down, how the Lakers looked in those kind of lineups and how that might match up with Houston?
Yeah, I think it really speaks to Aaron's point about kind of figuring out, okay, how much Dwight and how much JaVale are we going to see in this series? We're kind of used to seeing them platoon the 5 position, and I don't know if that's going to be possible in this series. I think, to your point, Mike, because it's so small ball heavy on the other side of things, you're going to have to go Anthony Davis at the 5 a lot. Maybe you play one of these centers, per game, and they don't get as much run as they would even if you were platooning them. Speaking to the lineup data, looking at that Portland series with Dwight Howard as your 5, they're actually minus 17 in 94 minutes, which was a little surprising to me. But just one lineup full of bench players. So you had Dwight with Dudley and JR, Deion Quinn. That one lineup was minus 14. So if you throw out that lineup, which was definitely more garbage time, Dwight's numbers are a lot more friendly. Whereas JaVale on the other side, he played almost exclusively with the starters. 61 of his 67 minutes were with the starting 5. And so they were a plus 41 in those 67 minutes. But how much does that speak to JaVale? I'm not quite sure. And it was actually a little surprising, too, because I think we're all used to the Lakers getting off to really bad starts in the first quarter, with one game as the exception. And I guess that one game just kind of shifted the tide enough. And then the big question, of course, Anthony Davis at the 5. What does that look like? So in this Portland series, he was a plus 79 overall, which was number 1 on the team. At the 5, he was plus 40 in 64 minutes. At the 4, he was plus 39 in 99 minutes. So both were successful in this Portland series. And obviously a lot of that has to do with the Lakers just being a superior team to Portland. But him at the 5 was more effective. What was surprising about those lineups is that they did shoot just 21% from 3 in those 80 at the 5 lineups, which you kind of expect when he's playing 5 and he was hitting his 3s this series, that would open up so much more shooting, and that didn't happen, but they were still winning those minutes. So obviously a different beast against Houston, but I am curious as to, do those lineups unlock shooting, or will they find their success in other areas that you wouldn't typically see the prototypical small ball lineup benefits?
All right, so a lot to unpack there, Joey, and thank you for doing all that back research too. So thinking about this,
yeah, you gave us all homework, True.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to get to more of your homework as well. Yeah. So, and in fact, my kids are about to start their homework in like 15 minutes for their school. So we'll also get to that. And thank you for ignoring that, please, if you're listening to this. The lineup data stuff against Houston specifically, right, it's almost unique to them because of the way that they play. And Portland was unique in that they were playing 2 7-footers, which we didn't see anybody do in the entire NBA throughout the regular season. I mean, maybe here and there. But when I was watching, I'll turn to you, Pete, on this. When I was watching the OKC series, Steven Adams struggled, I thought, to really be impactful. And as I'm watching, I keep thinking, all right, well, you have JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, just as both of these guys are a lot faster than Steven Adams, both in transition, both in the half court, in terms of getting out to shooters and rotating. Like these guys, I think, are a step up from that. And OKC still managed to have success with a lot of those groups, even though their best group, of course, is when they went with the 3 guards. So, Pete, before I ask you the specific homework question that you did research on, that stuff right there, like, does it matter that much in terms of playing that big versus if it's AD versus if it's Dwight or JaVale? Like, do those guys provide a different challenge for Houston regardless of what the teams have done that we've seen previously play against them?
No, I think Adams has historically been pretty good. I remember him being very good against Golden State, right? Switching out onto the perimeter and has some agility there. So I think he's comparable to the guys that we have. It's also, there's a point of attack issue, and that all stems back to how do we want to defend Harden specifically? Like with Russ, we know what Russ is going to try to do. Russ is going to try to beat you with force and speed. He's going to be attacking the basket, and whereas Harden, it has that choice of, is he going to be using step backs and sidestep 3s, or is he going to be driving to the rim? And that's going to vary from play to play. But when defending a superstar, you're never going to do it with one player. And by having that second defender, you're able to dictate how he beats you, right? So you can take away Harden's step back if you're willing to concede the drives to the rim. I think that if we are going to be playing those 2 big lineups, which have had success against Houston in that one game at Staples Center after the trade that Aaron was talking about, we were actually better with our bigger lineups than we were with 80 at the 5. Now,
and when they played 20 minutes, JaVale and Dwight played a combined 20 minutes in that game.
Right. And we were better in those lineups, but very small sample, right? So how translatable is that? But if we're at the point of attack with KCP, Alex Caruso, putting pressure sitting on Harden's left shoulder and funneling him into the paint, encouraging him to drive, that you have either JaVale or AD or Dwight or AD, whoever's on the weak side is able to rotate over to bother Harden on those in ways that's how you can get value out of them defensively. But then they're going to have to get into rotation, right? Ideally, the Lakers are in their best shape if they can get, House is okay at this, but Jeff Green, House as well, all of those guys, chase them off of the 3-point line after Harden has been funneled into the paint, and then have them making drive kick type decisions. Harden and Westbrook can do that really well. If we can get their shooters, Covington, guys like that, the more they have to do that, the better shape we'll be.
One thing I was thinking about watching OKC play Houston, and really all the games, but especially Game 7. So there were so many different possessions where Harden or Westbrook gets their foot into the paint, and coaches are always asking for that, right? Get your foot in the paint. And then OKC gets into the rotation, and they're coming off of PJ Tucker, right, which I would just not do. He's sitting in that corner three specifically for that purpose, right? He's the bet. He hit more corner threes than anybody in the NBA this year. The other guys that are spread out, Eric Gordon finally started to shoot the ball well. Covington, of course, shot the ball well in Game 7. So, Aaron, like when you're watching that and you're trying to think about it as a coach and from that perspective, how often, or as a player, like how often do you really want to pull off those spots that they want you to pull off to contest Harden and Westbrook if they get into the paint, which they will? Okay, like whether it's through a screen or whether through his beating you off the dribble, what is the balance there of getting into rotation versus just sticking on certain guys like Tucker, like Gordon?
So I think it's a kind of like human nature / muscle memory problem. You kind of don't want to at all, especially for the Lakers. The Lakers are so good at defending the rim. I'm inclined to kind of just let Russ, let Harden try to get to the rim and go up against AD, go up against Dwight or JaVale, whoever is in. The Lakers were, I don't know if they finished as the best shot blocking team in the NBA, but for most of the year they were. So I'm inclined to kind of not rotate as little as possible. However, that is counterintuitive to what we've been taught as basketball players, as basketball coaches for our entire lives. It's always get to the ball, help. If somebody gets beat off the dribble and gets in the paint, you help off of them. And that is what Houston is preying on. I think what's going to be interesting, another thing that's going to be interesting is Russell Westbrook, for some reason that is unknown to me, shot twice as many long twos in the playoffs as he did in the regular season. And basically no other Rocket shoots any long twos. So I think it'll be interesting to see.
I thought he was basically he was trying to find a rhythm is what I saw from that. Like, and he just was like, those were the shots that were immediately available to him. And I think a couple of the times they were up by 15 and he's like, all right, let me see if I can find this long too.
I think so. I wonder, I think you might be right, but I also wonder, and Harden's usage was down in the playoffs. Russ's usage was down in the playoffs. Both of their usages were down in the playoffs compared to the regular season. So I wonder if that and all those long twos Russ took is kind of either a hedge against them getting tired later or an explanation for that, maybe that they're already getting tired, because both of those guys have worn down in previous playoffs as series have gone on. So I wonder if they're going to get tired or are already tired. And that is kind of an explanation for their usage being down and Russ settling for those long twos. Because whenever LeBron takes long twos, everybody always says, look, you're a beast, get to the rim, take the three or get to the rim. If you're settling for long twos, it means you are automatically tired, or that is the refrain. So especially with guys that have been tired in previous playoffs, I wonder how that's going to play in.
I don't know if I think it took a long two, but go ahead, Pete. I saw you chomping.
Sorry. I think just the nature of this series, like Houston wants to stand around. It's part of why they switch and what they do on offense. And so I'm actually inclined to leave those shooters and we're so good when we're scrambling and closing out because we've got big and fast athletes, right? I agree under normal circumstances. Of course you don't want to leave PJ Tucker open in the corner, but we're at our best. And we've got this one guy in Anthony Davis that can kind of be two places at once, or at least 1.5, and he can help on the perimeter and then rotate, and his closeouts are crazy. Kuz is doing a great job on things like this. I feel like the more bodies are moving around, the more we're scrambling, that's going to play into that wearing them down factor too. Houston,
especially because they don't play anybody. Houston doesn't play. Right.
And so they're going to want to stand around with their 7-8 man rotation, right? On defense, hey, we're just going to switch every screen, right? You're not chasing and locking and trailing and doing all of that. And so that wearing slowing down point is a huge one. We're bigger, stronger, and faster than they are. So even if on individual possessions, leaving a PJ Tucker in the corner because we've gotten into rotation, maybe we get burned by some corner threes as a result of that. But over the course of a 7-game series, the more we make these guys run and jump with us, the better shape we're going to be in my opinion.
Yeah, I see the Lakers. We'll get to predictions in a little bit, but I see the Lakers wearing down Houston on that side of the floor actually more quickly, perhaps than some, just based on the personnel they have and how Houston wants to play. And the other name that we should mention when you're talking about AD and how he can beat the 3-point line and close out to the rim, playoff LeBron James on defense. If we remember back to the Warriors series, like when they were small, all of a sudden LeBron would just be at the rim. And
a weak side, especially as a weak side help. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So and you don't want him to have to do that for like all 40 minutes that he's going to play for an entire series. But like he's had a lot of rest now, which he talked about. He was on Spectrum last night with Ali Clifton. Like I always have to think let's remember that LeBron can make a massive impact on that side of the floor, especially if he has to do a little bit less on offense as the series goes on. So that's another name. And Kuz, we should talk about Kuz too. He all of a sudden is a good defender. Like a really good defender. His numbers were ridiculous in round one. But let me flip it to Joey for a second to talk more about the Lakers offense and how you think that Joey, they can execute what they want to against the way that Houston plays. Because they didn't, Portland wasn't doing the switching defense thing. Nobody in the seeding games, I mean, they did play Houston. That game was a little bit different, right? There was no Russ, no LeBron. But what do you think from an offensive perspective we're going to see here as the way that they match up with the Rockets defense?
Yeah, I think a lot of this series is going to depend on getting past the first defender. I think, Pete, you might have actually made this point, but that when you're playing a team this small, you don't necessarily need to bully their matchups one-on-one. You just need to take advantage of the lack of rim protection. So if you have a guy like LeBron who's built like a freight train who can muscle past his first defender, there's not going to be that 7-footer in the paint ready for a second challenge. There's just going to be an open lane there. And so that to me is how much of a step can LeBron get on his defender? How much can Rajon Rondo step the table if he is ready to go, like Frank Vogel says he's ready to go? To me, that's kind of the A side of how does this Lakers offense get into a groove. The B side is will the shooters show up like they did in the first round, post game one? Or will it be more like seeding games plus game one? Because we know that Houston is going to try to out-math you right now. We know that this is going to be a lesson in statistics from this Houston Rockets team that's just going to put up 3 after 3 after 3. And at some point, that barrage of threes, you need to hit a few to gain back that advantage. And you don't need to match them 3 for 3. In fact, I think if you try to do that, especially if you're the Lakers, you're playing right into their game. But you do have to hit a requisite number of threes in order to keep it, mathematically sound. And so, if that's side A and side B, I guess side C is also what are we going to see from the mid-range, which is kind of interesting. That's people like to say, mid-range is playoff basketball. I think that might be a little on the heavy side toward, things were better in the 90s, things were better in the early 2000s. But we did just see Anthony Davis shoot 68% from mid-range, which is incredible. That is almost double his regular season mark. So do we expect that to happen again? Probably not. But if he can if he could find somewhere in the middle, then I think that's going to be a huge key to the Lakers offense, especially given that the mid-rangers he was taking in round one were definitely more in rhythm, finding his spots. I think it was to your point, Mike, Nurk and Hassan Whiteside had to kind of play off of him. So he did have a little bit more space to shoot. And then on the polar opposite side of that, LeBron James took 0 mid-range shots in the first round. 0 mid-range shots.
Was just beautiful. Daryl Morey must have been looking at it. It was just like green dots at the rim and mostly green dots from the perimeter. It was and we thought that we talked about this last time. We swapped that. We had Ding in for Pete when we looked at this. We said, hey, Portland has literally nobody that can even pretend to stay in front of or deal with LeBron. And it turns out they also had nobody to contend with AD. Now, Houston does have a few more bodies that can at least give those guys somewhat of a problem. Now, I suppose.
Hold on. I think it's really important. Houston doesn't have anybody. They're better equipped to deal with LeBron than AD. Houston has nobody to deal with AD.
Well, Tucker.
And but see, so here's the thing. if the Lakers try to force AD in the post, if AD is playing 5 and they try to force him in the post, yes, Tucker can handle him. And even Harden can handle him. Harden is a really good post defender, strong. They have a bunch of guys built like tanks.
And by
I think that,
you mean better than many, but
yes,
so.
yeah. I think that is a big mistake. If the Lakers try to post up AD, I think that is a big mistake. If AD is playing 5 and he is out on the perimeter, PJ Tucker cannot stay with him. We saw it yesterday. PJ Tucker was giving up straight line drives off the bounce. He frankly looks old and slow to me.
Well,
now,
Schroeder,
Schroeder was getting him. CP3 was getting beat off the bounce regularly. And Anthony Davis, for a 7-footer, is incredibly agile, incredibly quick off the bounce, and has a good handle for a guy that big. I think Anthony Davis can beat PJ Tucker off the bounce and get layups and dunks. To Joey's point, they don't have anybody that's going to defend the rim. Robert Covington is their shot blocker currently, and he's 6'7". So I think it is a mistake for the Lakers to try to get Anthony Davis going in the post when he's playing 5. If he's out on the perimeter, I don't think Houston has anybody that can hang with him.
See, I was pleasantly surprised by how well our pick and roll game worked in that game after the Capella trade, in that I actually do think that AD with Tucker on the perimeter, like, that's Tucker being smaller than him, he can stay in front. He's not going to stay in front of Schroeder, but in front of AD, I think that the battle against Tucker is won 11, 12 feet in the air. So it's going to be, again, our pick and roll game I was really surprised by it, because most of the time when teams switch, it becomes this isolation hunting, like, oh, the worst defender, who do I want matched up? And we'll see that in this series with LeBron for sure. But AD is so nimble, and he's able to kind of front cut and get in and seal guys. It's almost like a fade route in football, where you got Rob Gronkowski or Calvin Johnson or someone like that on a 5'10", 5'11" cornerback, and AD's cutting in front of them, boxing them out, and just throw it up there and let me go get it. I think that's where I think even like part of why AD shot 68% from mid-range is because they were playing 2 feet off of him, like Joey was saying, right? PJ Tucker's going to be in his chest in how he defends him, right? And he's going to be trying to beat him to the spot. Houston is small on purpose. And so, of course, they've got designs for their rim protection, and their rim protection is to beat you to the spot, to not let you get to the rim in the first place. So I want AD doing a lot of his work off of the ball, whether it's rolling to the basket, crashing from the weak side on offensive boards. And when he touches the ball, he's 4 or 5 feet away from the rim. And once that happens, it's all over.
So the interesting thing about Houston, and this is, it's a little bit tricky to look at offensive, defensive rating and net rating just for the first round of the playoffs, right? Because it's only dependent upon your initial matchup. But Houston did lead the NBA in defensive rating. In fact, they passed the Lakers after that Game 7. And the thing about OKC offensively, though, is they were almost always having at least one weak spot out there on offense. And I don't think the Lakers are going to play too many lineups where they have a true weak spot on the offensive end, of course, unless somebody gets into a big shooting slump. But the question, and let me start with Pete and kind of go in the circle on this one. So when the Lakers are big, and I think they're going to want to stay big here and there. Like Frank Vogel has said this, they like to be able to do both. They like to engage these guys. They like to have the vertical spacing. What does JaVale McGee do on offense against this type of Houston lineup? What does Dwight do when those guys are in there, when they are big, to not just get sucked up like Steven Adams, it seemed, got in that last possession, right, where they're getting pushed out, they can't quite catch it inside. What do those big lineups do offensively with the center?
Yeah, these are dunker spot type games for JaVale, right? Where ideally you're getting LeBron, like Joey was saying, or AD in the paint, rolling to the rim. That they're the guys, LeBron and AD are going to be the guys who are responsible for kind of puncturing Houston's defense. And that's when it becomes like everybody to the rim, and that's going to be really JaVale's value, whether it's on those dump off passes to the dunker spot or crashing from the weak side. I would have him weak side dunker spot in a lot of, which means if you're not familiar with the terminology, it's if the ball's on one side of the court, JaVale would be on the other side of the court, right along the baseline, right between the lane line on the free throw lane and the 3-point line. And for a guy like JaVale, he's so athletic. That's one step and a dunk in. Though that's where you use him. This pick and roll game is not going to work particularly well with JaVale. He's really off ball, waiting to everybody crash the rim for those type of possessions. That's where I see that. Yeah. And
Aaron, I mean, yeah. The Rockets, they're conceding the rebounding battle, right? Before the game starts, like they know that. Yes. And you said this earlier. They're going to try to get you back with the math on the other end. So you can take advantage of that though, right? If
you have to.
Yeah, and you can kind of do it and the Lakers they absolutely have the personnel, right, to do that. In fact, their guards haven't rebounded the best this year. I think in part because it's so important for them to get back in transition. Often LeBron is going to be below the free throw line after dribble penetration. AD may be down there, JaVale or Dwight. So like the guards aren't going to attack in that end, but you don't need them to. If you just have the bigs rebounding. So how sum that up for us though? How do the Lakers take advantage of this without hurting themselves in other ways?
So Pete spoke to JaVale's role on offense and having him in the dunker spot. I agree with that. I don't think you're going to get much out of the pick and roll. But so as far as Dwight goes, I think that is like look, Dwight's a good screen setter. He'll set screens, but not so much in the pick and roll game. But I think Dwight's focus on offense, his function on offense is offensive rebounding and destroying the Rockets on the offensive glass. Because frankly, if you don't get, I think the stat to look at for the Lakers to win, and I think the Lakers will win the series, the Lakers are going to have to win the field goal attempt math. The Lakers are going to need +10, +15 in field goal attempts because they're going to be down 20 or down 30 in 3-pointers made, in points off of threes. So the way you do that is have Dwight destroy people on the offensive glass, as he has done to big teams. We've seen him do that to Denver over and over and just embarrass Nikola Jokic on the glass. So on the offensive glass, he's still an athlete. He's huge. He's a worker, and he knows positioning. He's a great offense. Dwight Howard is a great offensive rebounder. So for the math to work, Dwight is going, when the guys are big, when the Lakers are big, Dwight is going to have to just destroy them on the offensive glass. The Lakers didn't have any more rebounds than the Rockets. When the Rockets, that first game, after they went with their micro lineup, they were even in offensive rebounds and total rebounds. And so that led to the Lakers having only 6 more field goal attempts than the Rockets in that game. And that just won't work because the Rockets made 10 more threes than the Lakers. So it just simply won't work. LeBron had a bunch of turnovers in that game too. So if the Lakers don't destroy them on the offensive glass and maintain kind of turnovers, kind of stay even with turnovers so they can have a field goal attempt advantage, a big field goal attempt advantage, they're going to be in trouble. So I think the key to that is Dwight specifically winning on the offensive glass.
All right, Joey, I want to ask you about James Harden specifically and thinking about how the Lakers are going to defend him. Now, we saw what Lou Dort, right, making a name for himself, was able to do. And oops, I just hit the upgrade button, presume. There we go. The Lou Dort minutes on Harden, obviously very impressive. Now, the Lakers do have a few different options that they can throw at Harden. I wonder, who do you think stays on him the most? And the fact that he is, like, Harden becomes pretty predictable in a series because he's sort of like he's going to play the game a certain way. And, yes, he's going to try to get to the rim here and there, but you get used to his step back. He's not necessarily going to get those fouls, the Lou Williams Harden fouls, where he's going to get the arm with the other hand as much in a series. So that threatens a little bit less. But what's your take on the way the Lakers are going to use their various defenders on James Harden?
I want to point out that you gave us all homework, and I feel like I just got the hardest question. How are you going to defend the 3-time scoring champion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very capable. Very capable.
To your point, though, Mike, Pete and I have actually talked about this outside of this, and it's going to be a lot of just throwing stuff at him. It's not throwing the toolbox at him; it's throwing the tool shed at him. Every single thing that you got, you're gonna have to double him on some possessions. You're gonna have to, maybe pull a Nick Nurse, do a box and 1, do a triangle and 2. You're gonna switch up your defenders. You're gonna go size. You're gonna go speed. You're gonna just throw everything at him so that he doesn't get into a rhythm against one thing. Because he can take apart whatever your one thing is, or your 2 things, or your 3 things. It's changing up and giving him different looks, which will keep him guessing. And you kind of hope that that you do play to his tendencies. So he is turnover prone. He and Russell Westbrook are, while an effective fit this year, they are an interesting fit, and the playoffs are different. So you kind of have to try to play to their weaknesses. And as it pertains specifically to Harden, I do think the Lakers are going to start with Danny Green on him. I think that Danny's a sound defender, and he does have a bit of size, and he is technically sound. And I think that will be Danny's assignment first, but I definitely don't think that Danny's just going to straight up guard this guy for 7 games. I think you're going to see a lot of coups because you do need size against Harden. Harden shot 77% in the restricted area this first round, which is number 1 in the NBA. By the way, number 3 and number 4, LeBron James and Anthony Davis. But James Harden,
Look,
as we know,
Joey, this is why I didn't need to prep you for that, right? You just had that ready to go, man. You had the LeBron AD thing right behind him. Like, I knew you had that.
Just trying to cook for you, Mike.
Yeah.
So my point being that, it kind of ties into one of your earlier questions, Mike, which is how much do you help off of, shooters to defend James on the drive? I do kind of sway the other way. I do think you have to stick to the shooters because that's exactly what Houston wants you to do. But at the same time, this guy is so effective when he's going to the rim, 77% at the rim. Plus, he draws fouls like nobody else in this league. We'll see if he gets those whistles in the playoffs. But I think you're going to throw a lot at him. And predominantly, I think you're going to throw a lot of size at him.
All right, Pete, let me include Russ now and ask you somewhat of a similar question. But I like the fact that not only do the Lakers have, whether it's Green or KCP or Caruso or Kuz, but you have the second level of defender, and AD was so dominant defensively against Lillard and McCollum on those switches, where all of a sudden you get around the screen and it's like, there's AD like that. You've got that tool in your bag. So if AD is gonna roll over and help, from whatever his position is, what is Houston gonna try to do to manipulate that? Where they're pulling AD off of, maybe it's Tucker in the corner. Like, how are they gonna use that with Russ and with James Harden to try and make the Lakers not have such a strength defensively on that second level?
Yeah, they're going to try to put whoever AD is guarding, especially if AD is at the 5, in the strong side corner. So whatever side of the court the ball is on, whoever that guy in the corner. And that's what Houston typically does, is they want to pull your rim protection away from the hoop so that Harden is finishing against Kyle Kuzma as opposed to Anthony Davis. So, and now on those switches, AD's wonderfully equipped for that. Houston will likely try to screen out of that. AD does a really good job of fighting over and blowing up screens because he's a lot bigger usually than the screen setter is, and will be bigger than any of the screen setters that Houston has. So he can stay on who he wants to stay on. Russ worries me a bit in that so Kuzma, for example, right? We've talked about how he's taken great steps forward as a defender. He is a great finesse defender and that he's quick on his feet, right? He's got these amazing feet that allow him to stay in front of guys. When Russ dropped 40 on us in that game in Staples Center, he was going through Kuzma. He was going through Alex Caruso. And so that is actually a bigger worry for me than even Harden. Like, Kuz is a better matchup for Harden. If he's able to contain Westbrook the way that he has been really good on CJ McCollum and some other guys in the bubble, that is a different type of accomplishment defensively because Westbrook is so low to the ground, and Kuz's ability to be light on his feet actually works against him because he's never really anchored to the floor. And so if Russ gets a shoulder into him with that low center of gravity, he's dislodging Kuz, finishing at the rim. That's what we saw in that game. So it will be, if we can contain that power guard in Westbrook, I feel like our bigs are in great shape. And our bigs may be the answer to that, right? Like, I wouldn't want it for the full game, but if we're in the last 5 minutes and it's a 2-point game, AD matched up with Westbrook, I'm not sure that's a bad idea.
All right, we got about 4 minutes left here. So let's get to predictions, which is, of course, always the favorite part of any of these type of things. Now, I'm just watching Houston struggle that much with OKC, I thought was telling. Houston was not great once they got Covington. I think it's sort of talked about around the league that Houston, they went small. It made so much sense. But their record, I think it was 10-7, maybe after they made that move in the regular season. Now, the seeding games, I don't really count, right? It's kind of hard to know who was doing what in those games. And then they go to 7 with OKC. I just think there are ways, especially in the series, that the Lakers are going to be able to stifle what Houston wants to do, and they will find the lineups that they need to attack that Houston defense enough. And just LeBron and AD are fresh. They're totally healthy. So, like, my mind, if I didn't work for the Lakers, I think the Lakers are significantly better and should win in 5. But I think I'm going to say 6 out of variance, out of if Houston gets hot from 3 a couple times on how if Russ gets to a rhythm and gets to the rim. But I don't see this as tough of a series as many might. I think that the Lakers are just clearly better. So please feel free to throw water on that. If you guys want to, let me start with Joey over there. And but yeah, I'll officially say Lakers in 6, but I'm very tempted to say 5.
Yeah, I think Houston's going to math their way into 2, maybe even 3 wins. I do think that this is, when in that first regular season game when they went small, everybody was like, oh, they're going small against the Lakers first game, and they pulled out that win. I do think it's a different beast now that you're going up against the same opponent 4 to 7 times in a row. I do think this is a very big Frank Vogel series, kind of figuring out what works against this small ball team. I'll go Lakers in 6 as well, but I could see it going 7.
What's up, Aaron?
Yeah, I've got Lakers in 7. I think the Lakers are better than the Rockets, but I think the Rockets are a pretty bad matchup for the Lakers. I think it's a really even series, but the Lakers' freshness, LeBron in a Game 7, I don't trust Harden. I don't trust Russ in the playoffs. So I think it is a really even series, but the Rockets kind of run out of gas, and some of those Harden and Westbrook playoff demons bite them in Game 7. I've got the Lakers in 7 with Game 7 being a blowout.
Before we get to Pete, real quick, Aaron. So you think these teams are more even? I mean, weren't the
No. I think the Lakers are better than the Rockets,
Yeah.
but I think the Rockets are a bad matchup for the Lakers.
Interesting. Okay. Pete, what's
So
up?
I think the matchup. I think they're a bad matchup in an 82-game season where you face a different team before them, and then a different team after them. I think part of what makes Houston work is the novelty of them. I think this is true of Milwaukee as well. Right?
The option college offense.
It's like you don't play other teams like that. You're not game planning for like how many games per season are you trying to play that style, right? And
I think about 20 seconds. Hit me the prediction.
Lakers in 6, also tempted for 5. I'm in the same spot as you, Mike.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. We could go on for hours, okay? But we'll leave it at this for now. Thank you for joining us. That's Pete. That's Aaron. That's Joey. I'm Mike. And we will see you on Friday for Game 1. Let's go.